Can you imagine hip-hop without Eminem? Hard to picture, right? But back in 2007, we almost lost him for good. He was on the brink of death, addicted, isolated, and one bad night away from becoming another tragic headline. In this video, we're diving into the darkest period of M's life, the addictions, the loss, and the overdose that nearly ended everything. You think you know the story? Stick around, because it's even more intense than you've heard. In 2005, Eminem was at the top of the rap game. He was headlining the Anger Management Tour, one of the biggest hip-hop tours of that time, performing to sold-out arenas and feeding off the energy of thousands of fans every night. But behind the scenes, it was a different story, one that almost no one knew about. While he was spitting fire on stage, off stage, he was in a downward spiral, struggling with a growing addiction that he kept hidden from everyone around him. Halfway through the tour, things took a sudden turn. The European leg of the tour, which was supposed to be a massive success, was abruptly canceled. The official reason given? Exhaustion. But the truth was far more serious. Eminem's addiction to prescription pills had spiraled out of control. We're talking about Valium, Vicodin, and Ambien, popping them like candy just to function. The pills were initially supposed to help him deal with stress and the pressure of being in the spotlight, but by 2005, they'd taken over his life. He couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, and felt like a shell of himself. It was at the point where he wasn't taking the pills to get high anymore. He was taking them just to feel normal. It was like he was stuck in a never-ending cycle that he couldn't break free from. The situation got so bad that Eminem's inner circle stepped in and urged him to get help. That's when he finally decided to check himself into rehab. For fans, this came as a shock. The same guy who seemed larger than life on stage, who battled everyone from pop stars to politicians through his lyrics, was now battling a very personal demon, one that didn't care about his fame or talent. When M walked into rehab, he wasn't just dealing with addiction, he was dealing with everything that came along with it. Denial, guilt, shame, and the fear that he might never be able to perform again. And rehab was no quick fix. He did his time, went through the motions, but in his own words, he wasn't fully committed. He still didn't think he had a real problem. He even described the experience later as feeling like a vacation rather than an actual wake-up call. And like a lot of addicts, M relapsed not long after. Rehab might have stopped the tour, but it didn't stop the addiction. He wasn't ready to face his demons head on, and in a way, that tour cancellation was just the beginning of a much darker chapter in his life, one that would eventually lead him to rock bottom. If 2005 was the year Eminem's addiction started to unravel his career, then 2006 was the year it nearly destroyed him completely. Everything came crashing down when M's best friend and D12 groupmate, Proof, was tragically killed in April 2006. Proof wasn't just a friend, he was more like family. He was the one who believed in Eminem's talent when no one else did. The guy who pushed him to keep going during those early Detroit days when making it big felt like a far-off dream. Proof's death shook Eminem to his core. The way it happened was brutal. He was shot outside a club on Detroit's infamous 8 Mile, the same area they both grew up in. Losing Proof was like losing a part of himself for Marshall. He was already struggling to stay afloat, and this was the final weight that pulled him under. After the news broke, Eminem completely shut down. He disappeared from the public eye, canceled any upcoming plans, and isolated himself. In interviews, he's described this time as a period where he felt utterly numb. It wasn't just the grief, it was the terrifying realization that he didn't know how to deal with these emotions without the crutch of drugs. He turned to pills, and more of them. It was no longer about just popping a few here and there to take the edge off. It became an escape, a way to disappear from the pain of losing his best friend. Every day blurred into the next, and M became a ghost in his own home. He even started abusing methadone, a powerful opioid that doctors prescribed to people detoxing from heroin. Except he wasn't detoxing, he was diving deeper. He wasn't eating, wasn't sleeping, just popping pills, zoning out, and falling further down a hole that looked like it had no bottom. Proof's death didn't just devastate Eminem emotionally, it also crushed him creatively. The guy who was once unstoppable in the booth, cranking out hits and clever wordplay, now found himself staring at blank pages. He had severe writer's block, feeling completely disconnected from the music that once flowed so naturally. He even admitted that he stopped listening to rap entirely, turning to other genres just to escape the sound of the very thing he used to love most. For months, Eminem was stuck in this downward spiral. He wasn't showing up for studio sessions, wasn't picking up calls from friends or family. People around him started to fear that they'd lose him next. It was like the spark that made Marshall Mathers' Eminem had gone out, replaced by a guy just going through the motions, desperately trying to drown out reality with every pill he took. And the crazy part, even during this dark time, the outside world still didn't know the full extent of what was going on. Fans knew something was wrong, but they didn't realize how bad it really was, how close they were to losing him forever.
DMC, we have a mid-30s male found down, unresponsive, possible overdose, substance unknown.
By 2007, Eminem was hanging on by a thread. The pills had become his daily routine, and he was barely recognizable, both physically and mentally. He'd ballooned to nearly 230 pounds, his face bloated and his energy drained. But it wasn't just the weight gain that was shocking. It was the fact that Slim Shady, the guy who once had the sharpest, most dangerous tongue in the rap game, was now slurring his words and struggling to even make it through a day. Then, in December 2007, things took a terrifying turn. Eminem overdosed on methadone, a synthetic opioid so powerful that doctors often use it to help heroin addicts detox. But M didn't know how strong it was at the time. He just wanted to numb himself, to escape the crushing weight of depression and addiction that had become his reality. He was found on the bathroom floor, unconscious, barely breathing. The ambulance rushed him to the hospital, where doctors told him something he'd never forget. He was just 2 hours away from death. The methadone he'd taken was equivalent to consuming 4 bags of heroin. The doctors weren't sure if he would make it through the night. That's how close he came to losing everything: his music, his daughters, his life. And he'd later reflect on this harrowing moment in his song Arose from the Revival album.
Death is turning so definite, wait. They got me all hooked up to some machine.
The track captures the desperation of that night, the regret, the fear, and the sudden clarity that he was on the brink of death. But it wasn't just him who suffered. His daughters, Haley, Elena, and Whitney, almost lost their father, and that realization haunted him more than anything else. He mentions this again in Castle, where he writes a letter to Haley.
Don't take this letter I wrote, it's a goodbye note, cause your dad's at the end of his road. I'm sliding down a slippery slope. Anyway, sweetie, I better go.
The lyrics paint a vivid picture of the guilt that weighed on him, the guilt of being a father who let addiction steal him away from his family. He knew he was risking not only his life, but also leaving his daughters to grow up without him. After the overdose, Eminem found himself at rock bottom. He was trapped in a vicious cycle. He couldn't stop using, but he couldn't keep living like this either. He'd already tried rehab in 2005 and failed. What would be different this time? And yet, that moment in the hospital, on the verge of death, stuck with him. It became the catalyst he needed to at least try to get clean again. But the withdrawal was brutal. He's talked about how he felt like he was dying all over again during detox. He couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. The days blurred together, and he wondered if he'd ever feel normal again. For a while, the only thing he could think of was the next pill, because at least that meant some relief, some escape from the hell he was living in. Even when he finally started to regain his strength, the road to recovery was long and torturous. He had to relearn how to live without the crutch of drugs. He was afraid to write, afraid that he'd lost his edge. The confidence that once fueled his career was gone, replaced by self-doubt and fear of relapsing. 2007 was supposed to be the end for Eminem, but it wasn't. Instead, it became the start of a new chapter, one where he had to claw his way back, step by painful step. He didn't come back as the same Slim Shady we all knew, but as a man who had faced death and lived to tell the story. And maybe that's what makes his comeback story so powerful. He went through the darkest place imaginable, almost lost everything, but somehow he found his way back. It wasn't quick, and it sure as hell wasn't easy, but he did it, he survived, and every track he's dropped since then carries a piece of that struggle, a piece of that night when he almost didn't make it. And that's the story of how Eminem went from the brink of death to one of the most inspiring comebacks in music history. What's crazy is that while most artists would have faded away, M used his darkest moments to fuel his greatest comeback. It's not just about the music, it's about survival, redemption, and proving to everyone, including himself, that he's still standing. But what do you think? How did Eminem's struggle and recovery impact you as a fan? Drop a comment below and let's keep the conversation going. If you found this video powerful, give it a thumbs up, share it with another stan, and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any more deep dives into the world of Slim Shady. Until next time, and stay strong. Peace!